remember always that you're strong because you have, 12 military bases in Italy, you have, I don't know how many in Germany. So try to keep it in mind. History is full of, people that did not fairly treated their allies. So I'll accept the criticism. Still, don't forget who are the good ones and the bad ones. So that's the key element.
America is a people. And that is an idea that makes Europeans and Brits who've looked across to America primarily as an idea and as a proposition very uncomfortable. Effectively, we've looked at it as an imperial hegemon. And now America is turning around to us and saying, it's time you got up on your own 2 feet. So this is just a difficult reality for us to accept, but we really ought to start accepting reality, because reality is not an opponent you want to be confronting.
I want to dive in, if I may, to a question that is kind of at the front and center of everyone's mind. We'll get onto the geopolitical stuff in a moment, but one of the main themes at the moment in commentary around what Trump is doing and what's going on in the world is the idea that in the slightly chaotic first, however, up to 120 odd days of the Trump presidency, so much has happened and so much of it has been received poorly by lots of people, even maybe political allies or similar populists across Europe, that there's almost a kind of discourse developing where they say that Trump has kind of fatally undermined the national conservative course right across Europe as well, and that being associated with Trump or Trumpist style policies is now kind of considered a bad thing. I don't necessarily buy that narrative, but Guglielmo, what's your take on that?
Well, the first 110 days of Trump were a little bit chaotic also for us. We were expecting, I say we, as a conservative, I was expecting, a little bit more smooth approach towards the allies, expecting that, yes, of course, things need to change. So Trump was from the start an opportunity for all conservatives on this side of the Atlantic pond. Most of the conservative movements were not ready. They were still, clapping and wearing the MAGA hats, failing to understand, the impact that it potentially would have on Europe. So not having, very solidly prepared, of course, the shock was big also on this side. My point on Trump is that you really need to understand that he's doing frontier politics. And when I say frontier, it's something, primeval. That's the word I would use for his way of doing politics. And, we Europeans were used to a very different approach, a very soft politics. So, of course, he arrived, was disruptive on everything. We are still short in adapting, but I think it's a great opportunity. The only thing that Trump should not do is, misunderstand who his real friends are. Because, yes, make America great again, no problem with that. Make Europe great again. I think, as Prime Minister Meloni said, we should make the West great again. And America cannot do it without the European allies. And in that, Trump somehow disrupted some, nice elections that were already won, let's say Canada, let's say also Australia. So if we are losing, key allies in a project of making the West great again, that's something not useful also for the Trump agenda itself and for the conservative in Europe as a whole. So the take is Trump, no problem. We understand you. Try to be, much more practical towards us. That the gains that you will get, are much higher than what so far you got from out of us.
Yeah, no, there's lots in there I want to come back to, not least when I was speaking to our speakers before, and they both mentioned America Primeval, and everyone told me to watch the series. But there's something in that. But James, I know that you got maybe a slightly different take about Trump's impact maybe on the Canadian election, but also more broadly, has he thrown the populist cause into jeopardy, or what's going on?
Well, thanks. And can I just say thank you, Jacob, and thank you, Frank, and the whole MCC Brussels team for putting this event together yet again in the face of extraordinary hostility by a movement that has genuinely fascist characteristics in trying to push a regime ideology through and coerce private companies. That's what we saw last night. And so I salute all of you for being here tonight. And if any who have not been able to make it tonight because of the actions of Antifa yesterday, but are listening on live stream, welcome. We're so sorry that you can't be here. To the question, Jacob, it's a very interesting one. I have a good friend of mine, Eric Kaufman, has done a lot of interesting work on this, and he does indeed argue that the his empirical work suggests that Trump is having a very negative downstream effect on the electoral chances of pro-nation sovereigntist conservative movements all around the West. With great hesitation, disagree with him. I think Canada is an interesting case. Canada and Australia, as Guglielmo alluded to, are the two sort of test cases. Canada, I think people underestimate just how much people loathed Justin Trudeau. And I think when Trudeau was cast out, you saw that extraordinary 20-point gap that Poilievre had narrowing very fast, just because people couldn't stand Trudeau and were willing to have virtually anybody else in as leading the Liberal Party. I think they looked at Carney, and there's nothing a Canadian boomer doesn't like more than credentialism and competence, or the appearance of competence. Those of us in Britain who've seen him wreck the Bank of England and politicize it to a degree unprecedented in the history of that wonderful institution will disagree with that. But I think saw Carney as a sort of safe pair of hands. Poilievre as a young guy, untested, looked a little bit like an accountant. Didn't quite have the dynamism and charisma that we often associate with great leaders, charismatic leaders within the national conservative movement. And actually, don't forget, if you look at the numbers, the Canadian Conservatives got 40% of the vote. I think I'm not wrong in saying that. So they did actually incredibly well. As for Australia, as far as I know, Trump, not yet anyway, has not been threatening to annex Australia. Wait and see. But I don't think there've been any moves there. I think he sent a couple of strategists out there working in private capacity. And then if you look in Europe, I come over from London, where 2 weeks ago we saw local election results that just defy any historical framing. What we saw, there were local elections, 1,600 council seats being fought in England. That is to say, in those parts of England that the government permitted elections to occur in. And we saw an insurgent party that didn't exist 4 years ago win 677 seats. This is the first time in 100 years that a party other than the Conservative Party and other than the Labour Party have broken the grip of that duopoly since Ramsay MacDonald became Prime Minister with that minority government in 1924. And it's the first time in British history, in modern political history, that a party on the right in the United Kingdom has come through and decisively defeated the Conservative Party, if you leave aside Farage's win in the European elections in 2019, which are more complicated because of proportional representation. So we're witnessing extraordinary things in England and quite possibly, if the polls are to be believed, in Wales and in Scotland. And this is from a one-man party, in effect, whose associations with Donald Trump are very well known. He was often making trips to Mar-a-Lago, and I think that is something that is a risky association. There's no doubt about it. But for now, at least, it doesn't look as if it's done him any electoral damage. And then, look, you will all know better than I do how the pro-nation sovereigntist parties all across Europe are faring. Rassemblement National looks set to, if the courts let her out of jail, if her opponents let her out of jail, Marine Le Pen looks set to do very well in the 2027 presidential elections. AfD is doing very well. Maloney's doing very well. Vox is doing well. Chega's doing well. Orban will have to see. PIS won a plurality of votes in Poland, but of course that absurd majority of coalition that Donald Tusk is holding together with, how he's holding it together, but he is. So I think it's easy to overstate the sort of toxic electoral effects of Donald Trump.
Yeah, good. So I wanted to get that out there first, and then now have a little bit of a chance to wind back, because one of the is, I mean, when Trump was elected for the second time, everybody mentioned the fact that there wasn't the kind of hysteria, the kind of meltdown that there was the first time Trump was elected, but instead it was something a bit more muted. Maybe it was more kind of more systemic shock in a sense to European leaders and European institutions. I wanted to dig into that a little bit, Guglielmo, because one way this has been put is that for so long the European continent, in a sense, was completely away, on holiday from history, and that this was one of the reasons why Trump's second time around had such an impact, because it said that this is not an anomaly. This is something fundamental that shifted in the world order that European leaders have to wake up to.
Well, I remember back in at the end of 2015, with Salvini, we were trying to meet Trump, the candidate Trump. So it was basically, it was still trailing in the primaries behind Ted Cruz. We managed to finally meet him in April 16. He was then winning the primaries, so was leading the primaries. Well, everyone was underestimating him. I was sure of his first win simply because in the middle of nowhere in rural Pennsylvania, we came in the in a hockey hall that was packed with 25,000 people, chanting and all the stuff against the Clinton, lock her up. So there I understood that Trump was massive. No one was expecting that victory. Few of us were believing that. All the elitarian groups in Washington, D.C. I was the night before the elections in the Italian embassy there, and everyone was talking about the Democrat administration, who's going to be secretary of what. That was the stuff. The second Trump was much more expected. So the system was already, ready to see, have seen Trump in action. They've noticed that all the final ranks of the administration was ready. All the think tanks, the America First Policy Institute, all those guys were ready to take, their position in the administration. They had hundreds of people there ready to from day one to be on the administration. They had, policy written everywhere, so it was pretty clear, the path that was about to be taken. Still, no one was expecting that it would be so disruptive, and the Europeans, as usually, were sleeping, as we did in the last 80 years. No one saw, the Brexit coming. No one saw Farage coming, last week. They didn't see Salvini first, Bacega, Vox. I remember discovering Abascal back in 2018, and he was, driving with his family, campaigning around, and I followed one entire day, Santi Abascal at the Plaza de Toros. So it was a family, campaigning back then. We have seen the results. So I think that now, after all we have seen, Trump has been disruptive. We got the wake-up call, but the fear is there. And let me add something on, preventing the free speech. I've been with Berlusconi for, 25 years. They prevented us to have events back in 1993, 1994, 95, 96, and all up to when he was, convicted by a very heavily motivated judge, not just because he did something. So we have seen all the story for the last 30 years. Some of our allies and many conservative parties around Europe were laughing back then. Now, the story we have seen with Trump and what is happening with Marine Le Pen, with what happened in Romania is self-evident. But the story is written there. So the wake-up call is there. Someone was there in the public, was at the Plaza de Toros with me back in 2019 with Santi campaigning. Hello, Happy.
Yeah, well, James, wake up call. Sometimes, or someone referred to it as like actually European elites treat it more like an alarm clock and they keep pressing the snooze button. Do you think the message has really got through, or do you think there's still this kind of denial as to what's going on?
It's interesting. I mean, I think the reaction across Europe has been pretty sober. I think generally quite realist, but I think I can't quite understand the bafflement and surprise that a lot of European leaders seem to react with when they see Trump doing what he said he was going to do for the best part of 6 months on a campaign trail over and over and over again. Yes, he's going to put tariffs on. No, he doesn't care as much about Ukraine as the European elites. Yes, he does care about clearing DEI out of the federal administration. Yes, he is going to try and improve government efficiency by putting in an Elon Musk who everyone's going to call an oligarch. And I mean, maybe the shock is for the European elites that a politician who made a series of promises when he got elected delivered on the set of promises. And maybe this is something which is startling to your average EU leader. That's not the way politics is supposed to happen in Europe. It's not the way democracy is supposed to happen in Europe. You're supposed to, campaign in poetry and govern in prose, which is basically a nice proverb that European and British elites like to adopt when they say, well, we'd like to break the promises we made to the electorate once they put us in power. So maybe it's that. I mean, look, I agree with Guglielmo. I think maybe the delivery could have done with some of his Italian flair and diplomacy, rather than Trump's sort of no-nonsense approach. So perhaps, on the delivery, there's something shocking there. But no, I mean, look, what is it? H.L. Mencken's famous line on democracy, that democracy is the idea that people deserve what they want and deserve to get it good and hard.
Mm-hmm. There's probably some truth to that. Coming on then, we need to kind of say, well, we talked about the velocity of the Trump administration, the response a bit here in Europe, but the contours of the new era that Trump's inaugurating. And I do think, we've discussed this a lot in our work and on our podcast, but I do think there is a new era that's kind of signaled by the second Trump administration that does have some specific features. But what do you think that amounts to? What is the kind of what is the content of the wake up call, if you like?
Well, very easy. I mean, we got back to common sense. I mean, after years and years of ideology, stressed to the maximum, we are back to normality. To put the voters first, delivering as something very, very strange. I promise something and I do it. That's what I mean. Usually, I've been for some years elected to parliament. When I was promising something, I was trying to do it. Maybe I was prevented to do it, but at least was my intention to do it and to deliver on that. So my take, very simple, is that the Trump is delivering, is doing nothing else than delivering. So that's extraordinary, maybe. For the others, I think it's pretty normal, and I hope that Europe follows suit. In this way. Of course, we are more relaxed. We are still in our bubble. We're very comfortable with all the European Council, sitting down, negotiating. The world is moving much faster. So, the big challenge, the big opportunity that Trump is delivering is to speed up processes that were, bureaucratic. Take, for instance, the defense. Before, to produce one missile was like, 1 year. Now, you have orders, backlog of thousands of missiles, and, we're not ready for it. And the same for the bureaucracy and the political elite. We are not ready to the speed that Trump is imposing. I think there are smart people around that are quick, and mostly they are in our political, sphere. So I'm pretty sure that, election after election, we will see, people getting the speed of Trump. And so that maybe finally Europe will be able to deliver something positive to its electors.
Guglielmo just made me think of something. I just wanted to add to what he had to say. And I think, really for the first third or maybe a half of the history of the United States of America, Europe looked across to it as the New World. It was a new world, but it was distinct from the old world. Different things happened there. It was a frontier of exploration and experiment, and we wished them luck. And occasionally, some of our more entrepreneurial, exploratory types might want to emigrate over there. But really, it was a distinct world. And if you think of the last America First movement in the 1930s, that effectively is the culmination of that sense of discreteness and self-consciously independent mentality that the United States had. And really what we've witnessed, I think, in the post-war period is a different phase in America's self-understanding. And within that, it contained, like Walt Whitman, contradictions and multitudes. And one side was the idea that America is a people. America is a place. And on the other hand, you have this idea that America is a proposition. America is a project. And that ambiguity has never really been resolved in the last 80 years. One of the reasons it hasn't been resolved is because America's done very well out of it. America as a place and a people has done very well out of the illusion, or reality, that America is also this wonderful project and proposition. It's allowed it to really dominate the West and beyond economically, and that's afforded it extraordinary prosperity. What we're witnessing now, and I think to go back to your earlier question, Jacob, perhaps this explains the perplexity and bafflement, genuine and sincere bafflement, that there is in Europe, in the corridors of power, and in Britain. The two are not quite the same anymore. Is this reluctance to accept that an administration has come to power for the first time since the 1930s, that wants to say, in the words of J.D. Vance last July at the NatCon 4 in Washington, that America, this is the title of this speech, America is a people. America is not a proposition. It is first and foremost a people. And that is an idea that makes Europeans and Brits who've looked across to America primarily as an idea and as a proposition very uncomfortable. Effectively, we've looked at it as an imperial hegemon. And now America is turning around to us and saying, it's time you got up on your own 2 feet. It's time you defended yourselves when there's a regional Slavic conflict on your borders, not us. It's time that you worried about Houthis firing missiles, threatening, disproportionately a great deal more trade coming through those straits than America's revealed, interestingly, in that Signal group chat from a few weeks ago. And I think this is part of what explains our unwillingness in Europe, our sort of unwillingness to adjust to this new reality. Now, maybe it won't be a lasting reality. Maybe J.D. Vance is not going to win in 2028. Maybe we are not actually, maybe we're witnessing another slight aberration, but I'm not sure that's true, because I think the direction of travel is in the direction of pro-nation, sovereigntist conservatism. And I think in the end, you might say conservatism always wins because it's going with the grain of nature. And liberalism in taking on nature, taking on the most natural instincts that every human being has, namely that everybody is conservative about what they love most. You love your family more than others, and it's not irrational to do so. And you love your nation more than others. That doesn't mean you hate every other nation. In fact, it means you're better able to appreciate the love that other people have for their nation. This is not something that the liberal world order of Bureaucrats and technocracy and sort of Romaniacs in Britain. There are still some, like the Japanese soldiers found in the 1970s in caves, sort of just demanding that we get back into the Brussels' bosom. And so this is just a difficult reality for us to accept, but we really ought to start accepting reality, because reality is not an opponent you want to be confronting.
Yeah, there's something of it's maybe too strong to call it a contradiction, Guglielmo, but there's this strange event that's happening that's signaled by J.D. Vance's kind of attitude and words towards Europe, which you kept saying it's time for you guys to grow up. And it's a difficult proposition to kind of work through, because Europeans don't like nobody likes hearing from someone else, right? You've got to do this. It's time for you guys to do this and that. But so there's defenders of J.D. Vance that this will pose it as like, this comes from like a place of love. It's like, we have this historic bond across the West, but it's time for you guys to pull a little bit more. What do you make of this demand coming from or seeming to come from the Americans?
Well, any critic that comes from the outside is always welcome. You should listen to your critics. I mean, without criticism, you never grow up. So, honestly, I took the words for what they were. Hey, wake up. We go back to the wake up call. So it's nothing new. What I would suggest, to the Trump administration, as someone who has been in government, remember always that, you're strong because you have, 12 military bases in Italy. You have, I don't know how many in Germany. And so your projection is because you have some allies. So try to keep it in mind. And history is full of, people that did not fairly treated their allies. So I'll accept the criticism. I, share most of it, no problem. We have to do our homeworks. Still, don't forget who are the good ones and the bad ones. So that's the key element. Let's say something on our side. We were not ready to the language that the Trump administration was about, to the movement. So unless you have studied it, lived it, because you were there, you would not really understand what it means, the power that they had. So some of us had the possibility of living it throughout the years, so we're able to transmit to some of our leadership, what to expect. But most of us European, we were completely, not ready to understand the jargon that they were using, the language, and the answer that we should give. And we are still not ready. I've seen that Meloni in the Oval Office was using some keywords that the other one were recipient of. So I think that we have also to do something a lot on language to be on the same line, using the same jargon, just to share the same concept, because the concept there, the same, let's say, ideological piece here and there is different. So unless we, agree on the language, then we might easily misunderstand.
Right, I just want to add to say to Guglielmo, I salute your comrade and leader, Giorgia Meloni. I think her performance in the Oval Office was a masterclass, by far and away the finest performance of any visiting world leader in the Oval Office. And as we know, world leaders visiting the Oval Office and appearing in front of the press live need to tread very, very carefully. My son is turning 18 next year, and I am dreading the moment when I have to say to him, but I will say to him I must, you are no longer relying on my defense budget. You are no longer relying on my welfare budget. It is time for you to leave home. I don't particularly want it, but it's time. And if he then turns around to me and says, how dare you meddle in my affairs? How dare you intervene in my life? What is my response to him? I'm doing the opposite of meddling in your life. I'm doing the opposite of intervening in your life. America, after 80 years, is turning round to Europe, to Britain, to the other members of NATO and saying, it's time to grow up. It's time to leave home. You need to make your own decisions. You need to manage your own budgets. And sometimes, the Vice President has said this just as much, sometimes that will mean the permission that we're giving you, you leaving home, will mean you will act in ways that are not in line with America's national interest. And that's fine. That's what it is to be a national conservative. There will be conflicts. But what we love about Britain is not that they are a satellite state of the United States of America. We want Britain to be Britain. We want France to be France. We want Germany to be Germany. We don't think that equality means sameness. And that's what the European Union is designed to do. It's what China does. It's a project of homogenization rather than celebrating actual diversity and actual difference. It's the opposite of intervention. It's the opposite of meddling.
So I want to come out for some questions in a second, but one final comment from us at the front, which is to pose, in maybe the starkest terms, that once you kind of throw off a period of history in which by default everything went the way with the Americans because that was the dominant power and that Europe had very little choice about it, it would always go in one direction. Do you kind of open up a possibility of something that has happened occasionally in the history of the West, but not often, and it's always had major consequences, which it does, which is a fracture, a split in the very concept and the kind of geographical spread and the geopolitical spread of the West. If we start saying that Europeans in different ways will have different interests, that's definitely part of a new world, isn't it? A possibility that there's no longer this assumption that the West always thinks and acts the same.
Well, the possibility, history taught us that everything is possible. I would say it's unlikely, because I think that, there are enough smart leaders around Europe, and also, all the backbone of the Trump administration is smart enough to get to the point where, let's say the common interest, I want to use, the common interest will prevail. And our common interest is pretty clear. I mean, it's our Western values. I mean, our conservative values are the best around the world. So there's no real reason to split. So I would say that if we all do what we are supposed to do, we'll get there, we'll deliver, and the West will stay there and will expand and give others, the same wealth that we have enjoyed in the last 100 years.
Yeah. James, what do you think? Chance, possibly there's a new schism arising, or what do you think?
Well, first thought is that just as America wrestles with that internal conflict that I referred to earlier between whether it's a people or a place, or whether it's a project or a proposition, I think the arrival of the European Union, particularly after Maastricht in 92, and I was here living in Belgium when that happened. I think, we've been talking about Europe, and what does Europe do? What do Europeans do? Well, there are Europeans, but there's also the European Union. And are Europeans Europeans, first and foremost? Are Hungarians Hungarians, first and foremost? Are Germans Germans? Are Italians Italians? Or are they, first and foremost, citizens of the European Union? And right now, that tension doesn't look like it's going to be resolved very easily. I think you're seeing at the ballot box, and you're seeing in the polls, an attempt by the demos of these different countries to say we're losing the Kratos. The Kratos is now at the Belimo. It's not with us. There isn't any kind of accountability. We don't get really to say who our commissioners are going to be, or who our 5 presidents are going to be, and that's why we don't know their names, and we don't even know what they do. Yeah, that would be my first thought. Just quickly, I mean, Meloni's lovely line, "Make the West great again." I mean, I did a little deep dive the other day on the phrase Western civilization. And it turns out that nobody who lived through 95% of the history of Western civilization knew that they were in Western civilization. I did one of those Google engrams, and I did a few other bits of research. Nobody uses the phrase of the West until the West starts declining. Maybe this is Hegel's line. Hegel has this line that the owl of Minerva spreads its wings only at dusk. That is to say, philosophy and ideas can only really get started once something is in a state of decline. I hope not. But I don't know if anyone watched or read, I don't quite know how you put together a transcript of a speech by Donald Trump, but watched Trump's speech in Saudi Arabia last night. The end of history, just to backpedal a little bit, the end of history, of course, is a phrase from Francis Fukuyama's 1992 book. But he often gets a lot of criticism for being a kind of dewy-eyed liberal utopian, thinking that liberal democracy is won and we don't have to worry about ideas or identity anymore. We've won the arguments. But I think that's not fair. Right at the end of that book, he's got this famous chapter on the last man. The book is The End of History and the Last Man. Mm-hmm. And in that passage, he talks about how difficult it's going to be to suppress the thumos, that part of the Platonic soul that is neither base desire, epithumia, nor the logikon, nor mere reason. But it's that desire, what Hegel writes about in the Phenomenology of Spirit, the desire for recognition, the desire that the slave has to be recognized by the master, and the dawning awareness of the master that the slave is there to be recognized. And that is something that we suppress at our peril. Now, Fukuyama completely gets it wrong. I mean, this fantastic insight, and then he messes it up by saying, well, though the twin challenges are isophumia, that's what we really want to have, recognition of equal rights, which is the sort of sunlit uplands of a liberal utopia. And then the other one is the megalophumia, which is supremacy. And here's the idea that that in order to have a sense of identity and love for what is one's own, whether it's one's nation or whether it's one's civilization, we have to believe that we're better than every other. And I think that is that's the worst mistake Fukuyama makes in that wretched book. It's not, and in Trump's speech last night, he says, it was extraordinary. A US president is singing the praises of a Wahhabi theocracy. Is saying, you guys have done things brilliant here. We tried building nations, and what we did, we wrecked nations. We just let you to it. We didn't touch you, and you've been fine. Okay, you do things differently. It's not how we would do things in America, but you do things your way. So there was no sense of a kind of Western supremacy. There was no sense that the West has to win and so on. I think that's what's driving dangerously a lot of the kind of disastrous neocon projects, the forever warmongers of the early noughties. And I think that's a very, very significant shift. I don't know if it was a historic speech last night, but I think it will certainly, it's a very good index into the Trump's administration of how it understands the world. And it's an understanding that I think is much more fixed on finding pathways to prosperity and peace, far more than I think we've seen in any administration in living memory.
Yeah, well, then very good, James. Everyone not only struck a blow by coming tonight for freedom of speech, we got a free philosophy lesson in the midst. Sorry, so you did fantastic. But wow, there's in fact a job really for all of us. It's one of the reasons why we're here. One of the reasons why we have fought so hard to make sure that we can have events and debates and discussions like this one tonight, because this isn't an isolated job even for politicians or think tankers. Everyone in the room and anyone who's watching online certainly has a role to play on this. So we'll carry on fighting to make sure there are opportunities in Brussels and beyond to have proper, serious, substantive, and at times difficult conversations. We'll carry on doing that at MCC Brussels. So stay tuned for much more from us. Make sure you're following us on our social media. Make sure you're tuning into our YouTube channel, where we have a great weekly podcast. But for now, join us for a little glass of wine. But thank you all, and thanks to our speakers.